Up next on Way of the Renaissance Man, smoking cigars with Saddam Hussein.
Welcome to the Way of the Renaissance Man podcast. This is a show about ideas, personal empowerment, and celebrating the rational life. Our goal is to help each other discover the tools needed to better focus our minds, integrate our thoughts with actions, and live the lives we really want. I'm your host, Jim Woods.
What's it like to be responsible for guarding the highest profile prisoner of the Iraq War? That's a fascinating question, and the answer is equally fascinating, equally complex, and equally spellbinding. In this episode, Jim speaks with Kelly Hillier, the U.S. Army officer in charge of Saddam Hussein's security detail. And while you might initially think guarding a tyrant would be an austere detail, what you'll discover is that the job was much more nuanced and much more human than you can imagine. From smoking cigars together to reading poetry, the two men developed a relationship that is guaranteed to surprise you. Very few men have the opportunity to do something as unique and with as much historical significance as Kelly Hillier. And in this episode, you'll find out just how this exemplary soldier handled the difficult duty with class, skill, and with true American virtue. And now, here's Jim's conversation with Kelly Hillier.
So I want to take us back for a moment to December 13th, 2003. Woke up that morning and I saw the news, and the news saw Saddam Hussein being pulled out of what was basically a spider hole, and he was captured. And the whole world was rejoicing in the fact that this, tyrant, this evil figure, this stain on human history was finally captured by U.S. forces in Operation Red Dawn, as they called it. And then the world was wondering what was going to happen next. Where would this guy go? What were we going to do with this guy? Would we put him on trial? Would we execute him? Eventually, he was tried, of course, and convicted and executed. But in the time since he was captured and in the time that he went to trial, there was a soldier who was in charge of making sure his safety was secure and making sure that nothing happened to him during the whole process. And that soldier is my guest today, Kelly Hillier. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all you've done for the country. Oh,
absolutely. All in a day's work.
That's we say that in the military, but it is true. It's just our job. We're doing our job. And, I don't know any guys that walk around going, oh, I'm a hero. Everyone I know that is a hero just does their job the best they can. And the heroic part comes afterwards.
I often get faced with soldiers telling me that they don't know how to respond to someone saying, thank you for your service. And it's kind of a relatively new thing. I mean, it's not something that people have always said to you. But I guess it's not relatively. It shows you how old I am, but maybe in the last 20 years, we've been at war for 20 years, but I guess we have. So I always just say my pleasure. That's all I ever say. It's my pleasure. Absolutely. All in a day's work. And that's the best way to respond as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, people find out that I was in the military and then they say, oh, well, thank you for your service. And it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction sometimes that certain people have. And you could kind of tell when somebody's just saying it because it's something to say. But then when somebody really like is sincere about it and they say, hey, man, thanks so much for what you did or what, and you almost feel weird about it. Like I agree. At first I didn't really know how to handle that, but you know, you say to yourself, okay, well, hey, this guy appreciates what I did. So you just say, thank you. You know,
Right.
I just say thank you. And, you know, hey, it was my pleasure because for the most part, even though the Army is a love-hate kind of thing many times,
is, yeah.
you know, the love part is when you look back and all the stuff that you did and smile. And then the hate part is when you look back on all the stuff all the pain you went through and you realize it was a lot of crap too.
It is. And at the end of the day, you're going to miss it. I already know I'm going to miss it. I already know once I finally leave, I'm going to miss it. The weird interactions are the ones who they give you I was going to join, but response. And you're like, you don't have to apologize to me for not joining the military. It's not for everybody. And that's fine. I'm not judging you for not being in. It's okay. But you only get it from guys. Usually they're the ones who usually apologize for whatever reason. And, again, I think there's I forgot who the quote was, but he said that, I think, he said that men will always feel meanly of themselves for not have joined the military or been a sailor or something like that. I'm probably butchering that quote, but I'll have to look it up. But there might be some truth to that. There might be a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's that famous Shakespeare piece from Hamlet, where it's that St. Crispin's Day speech. And they say, those who weren't here will hold their manhoods cheap, knowing that they weren't here with us. We few, we proud, we band of brothers here on St. Crispin's Day. And I think that's probably true. I actually never went to Afghanistan or Iraq. I was before I was during the first Gulf War, and I was in airborne school during the first Gulf War, and it was over so quick I never actually got sent there,
No,
so
okay, yeah.
So I remember too, it was shock and awe while I was in the second week of airborne school, and the instructors were like, hey, guess what, you guys picked a great time to join the military.
My father was in at the time, so he was in Desert Storm. He was a first sergeant of the 2nd of the 16th 1st Infantry Division. And at the time, that was the largest company in the Army. And he was mechanized infantry for 20 years. So, he was. I remember sending off my father to Desert Storm, sitting in the hangar in Fort Riley, Kansas, with my sister at the time, who was 2 years younger than me, seeing my father off. And I remember it breaking out on TV. I remember my mom she was speechless. She didn't know what to say, but, we're just watching it on CNN back when it was a respectable news station, watching all the fireworks just kick off. So, yeah,
it was crazy. I mean, that was one of the first embedded kind of, like the wars where you could actually see the bombs flying from the embedded journalists that were with that was like, and it was actually from a PR standpoint for the military and for America, it was actually a very positive thing. It was a war that was quick and fast and, decisive. And we had a definite, bad guy that was doing he was invading a friendly nation. And, so there was no ambiguity about it whatsoever.
No, it was an asymmetrical battle. So, the good guys are on one side, the bad guys are on the other. Right. There's their tanks, there's our tanks, and that's just how it went. And so when this whole war kicked off, I thought I was going to miss all of it because I had been in since 95. So after I had served about 6 years in as an enlisted soldier, I signed up for ROTC. Well, when you sign up for ROTC, you no longer belong. Your contract with the Army is kind of null and void, and now you have a contract with ROTC, so you can't deploy. And of course, that was in 2001 when the war kicked off, and I was like, well, shit. Now I'm going to miss the Super Bowl. Like I've been sitting on the bench training because I've been a reservist my whole life. I'm like, well, I've missed everything now. Now I signed up. They're not going to deploy me because I'm worth more to them as an officer than I am, going over with my reserve unit. I'm going to miss all of this. It's going to be over like Desert Storm, 90 hours or whatever it was.
Right.
Here we are 20 years later.
Yeah, there was no, exactly. There's, I think there could have been a happy medium in there between 90 days and 20 years.
My gosh. I mean, 20 years, and, 3 deployments later. So, yeah.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that a little bit. Let's get into the kind of the main event of your life, as it were, at least your professional life. So tell me how you must have been you were military police, correct?
I was an MP. Okay. Yes. Okay. I decided I wanted to become an officer, went to UMKC, University of Missouri, Kansas City, did the ROTC program. 6 months prior to arriving in Iraq, I was flipping burgers at Applebee's. So as my job in college, that's what I did. Right. I didn't have any previous police experience whatsoever. And I thought I was going active duty. I wanted to go active duty. And, in ROTC, you don't necessarily get to choose whether or not you go active duty. That's basically based on the needs of the Army. And
they choose for you. Yeah.
Yeah, they kind of do. And for years and years, if you wanted active duty, you got to go active duty. But what happens is that ends up draining the reserves of officers. Mm-hmm. And so one year, the Pentagon decided, you know what, 75% of this class, you're going in the reserves. Well, that sucks because you have to figure out what are you going to do with the rest of your life. Hey, I was going to spend the next 20 years of my life being an Army officer, active duty. Now I have to go out and worry about getting a civilian job and be in the reserves. Mm-hmm. I wasn't so stoked about that. I was pretty depressed about it, actually. And I will tell you, I will go ahead and tell you now. So I remember opening up a GQ magazine because at the time I was kind of unemployed. I had quit my job at Applebee's, thinking that I was going to go active duty. And then, of course, I got the news that I wasn't going active duty. So I was kind of unemployed, kind of depressed, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I opened up a GQ magazine and I read an article about these soldiers who guarded Saddam Hussein. And I just remember kind of praying to God. And I've always prayed to God. I've always been kind of a spiritual person. And I'm like, it would be great for me to get to do something like that. Mm-hmm. And just so happens that, that's kind of talk about manifesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Something literally manifesting it to like it's to the gnat's ass. So, yeah, but I'll let you go ahead and.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, it was, so that's the funny thing about life. I mean, sometimes like 1 minute you're flipping burgers and trying to figure out what the hell is going to happen. And the next minute you're like in you're in Iraq and you're like in charge of basically safeguarding like the world's most notorious tyrant.
It is. Yeah,
so tell me about that. Yeah. Tell me about that. Tell me how you got assigned that duty, and then tell me. Let's talk about your experience, because I know it's an interesting. I mean, it must have been like a fascinating kind of. You interacted with him in a rather intimate level. I mean, you guys got to know each other, right?
Oh yes. So when we first, I got out of Officer Basic. I got the word while I was in Officer Basic for military police at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and hey. You want to deploy? We need a platoon leader. in our company. And I'm like, 414th Military Police Company out of Joplin, Missouri. We were just reservists. And I was like, yeah, sure. I want to deploy because I don't have a job when I get out. And that's pretty common for a lot of reservists when they get back. They don't have jobs when they get back from a combat zone, you know, if they didn't have one before they left. And that was my situation. So, you know, yes, I wanted the experience of deploying. I was pretty gung-ho. I wanted to feel what that was like to be a leader of men overseas in a combat zone. And so I took that job. And almost I arrived there in Joplin, and me and the company commander started butting heads pretty early on. I was a second lieutenant. He was a first lieutenant. He had a mustache that pissed me off. Officers aren't supposed to have mustaches. That pissed me off. And he looked like super troopers. It drove me nuts. And and it was kind of those guys in that unit were it was almost like a National Guard type feel, you know, where they all knew each other. They all lived in that town. I was an outsider. Most of the guys in that unit were all police officers, or firefighters or something like that. I was not. Like I said, I flipped burgers at Applebee's. And so he didn't like me. I didn't like him. He tried to get me off the mobilization, and I fought with the battalion commander, went directly to the battalion commander, and she blessed off on me and said, no, you're going. Anybody who wants to go this bad deserves to go. And so I went, and we got to Camp Bucca, Iraq, which is down southern Iraq near the Kuwaiti border. And that's like an internment facility. That's, you know, it's where we keep all the prisoners, mostly the really, really bad guys. You know, I was there for probably a month, and we were on tower guard, and I didn't really like it. I was like, oh, come on, man, there's got to be more to that. We're going to be on tower guard the whole time we're here. And so again, you know, this is throughout periods of me and the company commander butting heads, and they said, hey, there's a mission in Baghdad. We need a platoon of MPs. And I'm like, I'll take that mission, not knowing what it was. I had no clue what it was. And I loaded up all my troops and went to Baghdad. And if anybody wanted to stay, they got to stay. And if anybody wanted to go with me, they got to go. Most of them went with me. And then we flew into Camp Victory, and we went to a smaller base called Camp Cropper that lies within the Victory Base complex. And that's where the 52 deck of cards are kept, -1. So that was where Chemical Ali was, and all of those guys, all of his cronies. And then, of course, Saddam was kept all the way clear across on the other side of the base. And so anyway, and the reason we knew what we were doing, as I guess as a joke, the cadre there were playing the part of Hot Shots Part 2, if you remember, where he's sword fighting Saddam. That's how we knew what we were going to do. And so they took us to this facility in a bus with newspapers over the windows, and this facility sat on a lake, had a drawbridge leading up to it. It had 2 JDAMs, which are bombs, that were dropped in either side of it. It was almost like 3 buildings in one. Still a relatively small island, but 2 bombs had been dropped on either side of the buildings, and so it looked like a dilapidated palace. It was a dilapidated palace, actually. It was one of his son's pleasure palaces. And you knew that because his son's initials were written all over the walls in there. And he knew where he was. So anyway, that's where we lived. That's where we kept him. We kept him inside. Was a state-of-the-art facility. internment facility. So it was intentionally made to look that way, honestly. So but I will tell you that it was no big secret that he was there. Everybody knew he was there. So at least on the base, everybody knew he was there. So, yeah.
Yeah, that you can't keep that kind of thing secret, and it's very difficult to keep anything secret in a platoon. Everybody's going to find out soon. You know?
Well, it is the base. Victory Base is a massive, massive joint base. So, absolutely massive. I mean, that's where General Casey was. That's where General Petraeus was. That's where everybody was. So, the fact that we only left at night for the most part. And, when we did leave, Blackhawks were usually waiting for us to pick us up. Or when we did leave during the day, we would go see his lawyers. I mean, the whole base pretty much shut down. So we didn't do a very good job. Well, not me, but I would say that the leadership probably didn't do the greatest job of keeping it under wraps, considering the security and spectacle that was created when we left the facility at any point. So, it's a small base. So, I mean, it was a large base, but the community was small. So people have eyes and people, take notice.
Yeah, that kind of thing is people, like you said, people have eyes, people hear things, and they know that, hey, well, what's going on over there? Oh, something important,
Right,
something
exactly.
interesting. Yeah. So okay.
Absolutely.
So when you were put in charge of that detail, what was your first encounter with Saddam himself? Like, tell me about or when you first found out that you were going to be doing this, what was that whole process like? And walk me through that whole thing.
Well, essentially, like I said, we drove onto, we called it the Rock. So we drove onto the Rock, and we kind of met our counterparts that we were replacing. There were other people who had watched him up to that point, because you got to remember, I mean, we had him for almost 3 years prior to that. So It wasn't as though nobody had guarded him. We guarded him we were the only ones who guarded him during the court process.
Yes.
So court was getting ready to start, which was a whole different aspect to the situation, to the mission. Up to that point, well, at least prior to us, we replaced a chemical unit, and I guess they were all types of fucked up. So excuse my language, but they're like, we got to get and see, here's the thing. At that point in the war, MPs were kind of a scarcity. They needed them, even more so than the infantry guys. And I think it's because of the rules of engagement were just different. So, a lot of people think that, well, you're an MP, so you do police work. Not as an officer. You almost get no police training whatsoever. It's more of personal security, VIP security, all combat stuff. So, you're on convoys and gun trucks, and you're providing security for supplies and logistics and things like that. And as you remember, hearing about the war, IEDs and things like that, that's where a lot of the bloodshed happened, was on the roads. So, so that's, but anyway, they just weren't, the chemical guys just weren't skilled in cage kicking, as they call it, and detainee operations. So that's why they needed MPs up there.
So did you? So when you got assigned that detail, and you're input, they tell, hey, here's who you're going to be guarding. Here's what you're going to be doing. Did you have to develop protocols for that, or did you have to carry out some protocols from General Petraeus, or how did that whole thing work, operationally?
No. So I will be honest with you. Very little guidance was provided to us, or me, in terms of how to interact with him other than my job was to befriend him. And so the XO of the 43rd MP Brigade, his name is Lieutenant Colonel Vartanian, close friend of mine from Rhode Island. They were the 43rd MP Brigade were the ones in charge of us. And they're out of Rhode Island National Guard. And they sound like they're straight out of Sopranos, every one of those guys. And I never knew that this was the case. I always assumed that I was just randomly picked. If you talk to Colonel Vartanian, he says that wasn't true. I was picked for a reason. And I was picked because of my age and because of where I came from. And, you know, people not knowing the difference between Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas, think I guess I grew up in Kansas too. So I'm a little bit of both. Kansas boy, Missouri boy. I'm a Midwestern boy. And at the time, like, you know, we need this kind of kid in this mission because he's going to be interacting with this guy and we need Saddam to trust him. And you're not going to get somebody who's this jaded, you know, snake eater in there guarding him because he's going to approach it differently than somebody like myself who might be a little wet behind the ears, actually a lot wet behind the ears as a second lieutenant. This is my first mission as a lieutenant, right. Maybe a little naive. And so I remember waking up that morning after arriving on the Rock and I'm meeting Colonel Vartanian. And, you know, in this deep Rhode Island accent, you know, he's like, hey, you know, you ready to go meet this guy? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, you worried? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, oh, you'll be fine. And he told me that, you know, your job is to befriend him. You're going to befriend him. And that is because a lot of MP protocols just did not apply to him. It just didn't. And you got to remember, though, we had never had anybody like him before. We never had Hitler. You know, we never had, you know, we've never had a dictator like that before under our control. So what rules do you apply to well, I mean, at that point, he was still considered a president of a country, right? He hadn't been convicted of anything. He was a detainee. So HVC 000169 was his number. So, and we called him Vic. So, and I don't know where Vic came from. He answered to Vic if I called him Vic. It was either Victory or Very Important Criminal. I don't know which one it was.
Yeah.
So, you know.
That's super interesting. I could see that. I mean, I you know, that's what I was going to ask you actually. You preemptively addressed it because my theory is that they would want someone who could kind of go with the flow and mold in with the guy, like kind of, you know, bond with the guy almost. And like you said, you wouldn't want the guys who had captured him to be the type of guys who would be in charge of kind of befriending him. That wouldn't be the same kind of guy that you would want.
No. No. And, you know, it's right. They're going to want somebody who has a certain type of, I guess, maybe a background. And so, you know, it was a difficult mission for me, like ethically and, you know, just morally speaking, you know, knowing all of the things that he did. And when I first met him, you know, they walked me into the cell and I walked in and they opened up several doors to the cell and he was the only one there. And he stood up for me like he always did. He always stood up for me when I walked in. And, you know, I shook his hand and I said, my name is, you know, Lieutenant Hillier. You can call me Kelly. And I'm going to be taking care of you. And I was very specific on how I addressed him. I wanted to make sure he knew that I was there to take care of him and try to establish trust that way, rather than come in like some type of an authoritarian, hey, I'm in charge. You're going to do what I say. You're not going to get anything. You're not going to get anywhere with him like that. That's just not going to happen. So you got to approach everything with honey with him.
Yeah, I would imagine that I'm sure that's how he dealt with other people, in a much, maybe obviously in a much more, ruthless way. But he probably, I mean, this is just conjecture. You can confirm this, but it seemed to me like the honey approach with a person like that, in terms of like just achieving our objectives, which would be to safeguard him and also bring justice to him, would be the best way to do it. I guess it did work that way. I mean, you're the proof.
It did work that way. And maybe one time you're going to have to interview Colonel Vartanian, because he adds something to it in that deep Rhode Island accent, and just the way he talks and how, evil he, perceived Saddam. I remember going back to my room after meeting him, and the first initial meeting was very quick. I met him. He was very cordial, very respectful. I was the same. And then we just kind of went over the daily routine, and then we adjusted fire from there. We're like, all right, as soon as these Kim guys are out of here, we're going to do our own thing and do it right. So, but at the same time, military police protocol didn't necessarily apply to him. Plus, you have one detainee. You don't have a whole prison. So things are very different when you have one detainee, especially one who has the ear of every general, in theater. So if he wants to talk to General Casey, he gets to talk to General Casey, or General Gardner, who was Task Force 134 commander. They were in charge of all the detainee operations. So, he could get, if he wanted to talk to somebody, he could. What also helped me was I was a second lieutenant and I was young, and he understood rank structure. So he didn't blame me for anything. Anything that happened to him was a general's fault. And I made sure he knew that. I didn't want to get blamed for anything. It took a while for us to establish a relationship. But, I guess he just started warming up to me, because I'm not kind of an authoritarian when I'm in a leadership position anyway. I like to joke with my soldiers. Right. I'm very personable with my soldiers. That might be because I used to be enlisted before I was an officer. I've heard that those are the best type of officers. I talk with my hand a lot. I remember that he started making fun of me because I talk with my hand. And he liked my face. He used to say that my face reminded him of the moon. I don't know if that's because I had a fat face or whatever, but he said that he felt like I had a trustworthy face. He liked my face. And I remember one day I would come out and I would ask him, "Hey sir, do you need anything? Is there anything that you need?" And he would be sitting out there, writing his poetry on his yellow legal pad and smoking his cigars. And one day he just asked me to sit down and smoke a cigar with him. And I had never smoked cigars before. That was my first one. So my first cigar ever smoked was cut and lit and picked out by Saddam Hussein.
Wow.
So yeah, and I only smoked. Well, for the most part, he saved his best cigars for me and him. So Churchill's, Cohibas. Those were the cream of the crop as far as he was concerned. And so that's what we smoked together.
Wow.
And he had a weird method of keeping them fresh, which weird, and it sucked actually. But he insisted, even though we bought him a humidor for his cigars to keep them in, he would keep them in Gatorade bottles, and he would take a white, just like a cotton ball, and he would wet it, and he would stick it up in the lid of the of the Gatorade bottle, and then he would put the cigars in there, and it made it good for transporting when we went to court. So he would have an entire duffel bag just full of cigars, different varieties of cigars, keeping the ones that for us, in one place, and then kind of the cheaper cigars for his buddies at court that was his time when we went to court to see those guys. And so they would smoke cigars in between court and all that stuff. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So, well, there's no better first cigar story than that I've ever heard in my life. So congratulations, my friend.
Well, let me tell you though, the way he kept them though, the way he stored them, it made them really wet. So,
you had to relight them probably frequently.
Holy shit. No, well, I mean, it just takes forever to smoke Churchill Cohiba that's wet, you know, and I'm puffing and puffing and puffing. And of course I'd never experienced that. So if you've never smoked a cigar before,
that was your default.
Well, I couldn't tell whether I had to go to, take a dump or throw up. I couldn't tell. I just went to the bathroom and I sat on the toilet after I was done, and I was like, oh, I don't know what's going on. I was dizzy and everything else. And you smoked it until it was done. You smoked it until it was done.
Well, that's a long smoke. It's like a 2-hour smoke plus. I'm sure they were Cubans, so there's even more of a kind of a flavor of an intensity that kind of buzzes you out a little bit on there.
We had a budget for cigars, so we would purchase him cigars, but his daughters and wife would send him Red Cross messages full of cigars, amongst other things, suits, shirts, things like that, gifts. They would send him stuff, and so we would. Yeah, I mean, so he had a lot of cigars. He really did. And so, but every night was a 2-hour smoke session with him. I spent, it was a nightly thing. Very rarely did I not go out there. There was a point where I think my leadership kind of saw it was getting to me. It was getting pretty rough a little as we got deeper into the court process. As I started seeing the witnesses and hearing about the atrocities, it started to kind of wear on me a little bit.
Because you were there through the whole thing. You were there in the courtroom throughout the entire.
Well, we were never in the courtroom. We would hand them off to the Iraqis in the courtroom.
Okay.
We were always waiting for him in the alcove on the outside of the courtroom, and we would take him down into the cell block and conduct cell block operations. Now, whenever we had court, it wasn't just him. It was the other detainees too. So we had a whole separate platoon that would take care of them, and then my guys and me would take care of Saddam. And so, and they loved court because they got to hang out and, talk to each other. And they used to hang out in this cell. We called it the Hannibal Lecter cell. And it was literally just like in the movie, Silence of the Lambs, where there's this big square cage that sat in the middle of the floor. It was in the middle of a boiler room, and they had a little table out there, and they had chairs, and they would go out there and they'd put on their pajamas, and they'd have their cigars, and they'd have their tea. My soldiers would make them their tea, and, they would sit out and smoke cigars and drink tea together. And just because we were at court, didn't get me out of smoking cigars with him. So just because he was with his boys didn't get me out of it. So he would still call for me, and I would come in. And I remember one time his brother Barzan, half brother, was sitting next to him at his right hand. And I walked into the cell, the Hannibal Lecter cell, and they didn't stand up for me, and he got pissed and made them stand up for me when I walked in. And I didn't, it wasn't me insisting, he insisted on it.
Right.
And he made Barzan give up his chair for me. And I sat down, and as soon as I sat down, he would pull a cigar out and he would hand it to me and light it, cut it for me and light it. And we would just talk and socialize. And oftentimes the other detainees, Barzan was the bad one. He would try to get me to say things or maybe share an opinion that maybe I shouldn't share. And Saddam would catch on to that, and he would just touch me on the leg and just say, you don't have to answer that. Don't answer that. And he would chastise his half brother, and yell at him, because he was like he was protecting me. He didn't want me to get in trouble in any way. So,
right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. You wouldn't think he would have that kind of I mean, you don't think of Saddam Hussein as this kind of nurturing human being that would, that enjoyed the little things in life, but that it shows that, everybody does have that, even if they have like the darkest possible side to them.
He was a human being. And he used to call me his American son. Which was a very weird thing for me.
Right.
So a lot of people think that, I was under some kind of spell with him. That wasn't the case. I always knew that I was going to do my job, but my job was to be close to him. That was my job, to have an intimate relationship with him, where, we talked on a regular basis, and I knew what he was thinking. I knew where his mindset was when going to court, especially when he was getting into it with the judge all the time. So it was necessary. But it was also very difficult for me. Psychologically, it was very hard.
Right.
And I spent a lot of time in contemplation and praying to God. And I just decided, I remember the first night, and I prayed to God, and I was like, so, how am I going to approach this? And I remember, so the Passion of the Christ just came out. I remember that. I saw the Passion of the Christ. And of course they do, the Sermon on the Mount, and, when Jesus is talking about, do you treat your, love your enemies. And that's how I approached it. That was the philosophy the whole time. I'm going to love my enemy, and I'm going to treat him with dignity and respect the whole time. And that's how I approached it the whole time, because I always felt that that's what the president probably would have wanted. That's what America would have wanted. They would have wanted to hear that, especially after all the Abu Ghraib stuff, where, the prisoner abuse and all of that. And, that was a big black eye. And so I had decided that that's not how we were going to go. We weren't going to do it that way. We were going to do it the right way. And so that's what we did. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, you may be somewhat embarrassed to hear this, but you actually personified American values more than any other, this circumstance, more than anybody else I've ever heard that had a war story. Because it's one thing to go in there and, kick ass and blow people up and break things, which is what we had to do, of course. And it's just part of the nature of humanity. But the flip side is we're a moral country that acts morally. And that's what gives us the right to take down someone like him. And you personified that in your behavior. And that's what's quite beautiful.
Well, one of the things that I have a letter that signed by all of his attorneys and by him, and they're asking General Casey. It's addressed to General Casey, and it's asking that we stayed with him. He wanted me and my platoon well, it was more specifically me. He really wanted me to stay with him, because we were getting to the point where it was getting ready. It was going to be time to rotate out, and it said in the letter that the lawyers are writing this, and they're saying our client feels that Lieutenant Hillier represents the best of America, and he is requesting that he stays with him. I mean, it says that for like in the letter. So, and I don't know how to take that. There's so many better people, better soldiers than me, and people who have done way more than I have. So, I was probably, my ex always said, you're the right person at the right time. There's nobody else that could have done it that way. It just all worked out perfectly, and it was just kind of divine intervention for that to have happened, and especially for me to have read that GQ article almost a year earlier about that same mission. That's nuts. That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, that is. That's foreshadowing your own life for sure.
Yeah, that's literally manifesting something out of nothing. And to the, like I said, the gnat's ass, like that's, yeah, I've never manifested anything like that before in my life, if that's something that you believe, but that was crazy. So,
well, that's how I like, that's what's so fascinating about life. And that's why, like, I find so many different things interesting, which is, of course, the ethos. One of the main ethoses of this show is, to focus on the world and to integrate all these different things that you experience, and then to celebrate like both the hard times and the your victories, and just the fact that you're existing, and whether it's in a crazy kind of, whether it's smoking cigars with Saddam or just someone having a normal kind of, struggle in their 9 to 5, it's all similar if you approach it in the way that you can get the most out of it.
Absolutely. And it's like, I mean, I don't know if you ever follow like the philosophy of Stoicism and things
Yes.
like that, but it does help you get through all of that. And, because when I got back from Iraq after doing that mission, like I couldn't tell my family what I had done. And I couldn't, I didn't have a job when I got back. I was still unemployed. I was right back to being a normal guy on the streets with no job. I went and stayed with my aunt because I didn't have a house to live in. I had an apartment. I had nothing. No furniture, nothing. I had nothing. So it was difficult when I first got back, because what do? You get back from doing this mission, and this is, well, what's your next step after that? I'm not going to write a book. I'm not a Navy SEAL, so I don't write books like 24 hours after doing the mission.
You said it, not me.
I know. That's just it. Actually, we had SEAL team. We had I won't mention the SEAL team, but we had a SEAL team train us up for that mission. They showed up as advisors, and they showed us how to move him. We moved him through Black Hawk helicopter mostly. And so, we got the latest and greatest gear, and, when it was time for court, they would fly us out, and a couple Black Hawks and some Apache gunships would be our escorts, and they would fly over the top, and they would land for us, and we convoyed out, in the middle of the night, night vision goggles and all that stuff, and got him out of the Humvee and loaded him up into the Black Hawk, and I would buckle him into the seat next to me. And, I just remember, thinking, as we're flying over Baghdad, and, the whole cockpit is lit up in red info, like the red, bulb and stuff. And I'm like, oh my, and Saddam would he would hold on to my pant leg when we would fly, because he hated to fly. So he would hold on real tight to my pant leg. And, you know, and I just remember thinking, I was like, man, I mean, if my parents could just see me now, you know, I mean,
yeah, exactly. Your drill sergeant dad would be like, "Oh yeah, I think he made it into the military."
Yeah, I think so, but no one knew. And I remember my grandma, who was still alive at the time, you know, she followed the Saddam trials, you know, closely. She watched it. I would talk to her on the phone, and she's like, "Hey, Kelly, you seeing that son of a bitch on trial? They got him. They got him. Do you know anything about that?" "No, Grandma, I don't know anything about that." And he's 100 feet away from me, less than 100 feet away from me.
He was grabbing your leg at the time.
I can still taste the cigar on my breath after smoking with him. And, you know, there's lots of, you know, and he would just sit there and we would talk about just lots of things. I mean, just anything. You know, one time, my sister's name is Honey. That's her name. We call her Honey Lynn. Her middle name is Lynn, and so we call her Honey Lynn. And I showed him a picture of her, and he wrote me a poem about honey. And then he gave me, I guess he had his daughter send him a jar of honey, and he gave that to me, like as a gift, to give to her. And you know, that's part of the culture. You know, they give right. gifts. That's what they do. And I mean, I wasn't necessarily allowed to keep any of that stuff, but you know, you take it and then you put it on a shelf somewhere and all that. And so, you know, there was one day I remember I was sitting there and we were waiting to go to court, and I was just kind of tired. And you know, he had sat there and he goes, "Did you eat?" And he's eating his breakfast. And I was like, "No, I didn't eat this morning yet." And so he's eating an omelet out of a styrofoam container. And so he cuts the omelet in half, and he shared the omelet with me. So we were eating an omelet out of the same container. Wow. You know, yeah, just sharing food with Saddam, you know. So
that's crazy surreal, man. That's like,
and he would give me hugs. And so the U.S. Marshals ran the court when we got to court, and they weren't allowed in the cell block, so no one got to interact with him but me and my guys. And they would see on camera when the Black Hawk would land, we would get out of the Black Hawk, we would convoy over to the courthouse. We'd unload him into the cell, and then I would set up his cell in a very specific way, the way he liked it. And he would always give me a hug every time. That was how he greeted me. And I have a habit when I walk into any room or whatever of a group of people I know, I'll just like, "Hey," and you know, and he started responding like that. So I would walk in and I would say, "Hey," and he would go, "Hey, you know, where have you been? You know, I've been waiting for you." And like inevitably every night we would smoke cigars. He was waiting. So yeah, kind of a cool experience. I was very blessed to have that experience.
Yes, definitely. I'm thankful that you shared it with us. So let's, I know your time's, you know, I want to be respectful of your time, but okay. All right. So, so you mentioned that after you came back, you were basically where you were. I mean, you had no like career, like plans after that. So what did you do? How did you end up getting back active duty and like to where you're at now?
When I got back, I became a general's aide. So my reserve career has been, you know, kind of a compilation of a lot of long-term orders. So my reserve career, I ended up becoming a general's aide to a 2-star general. And because I heard about the mission and they're like, "Hey, you'd be good for an aide position," even though they don't necessarily translate. And nothing against her. I just didn't like being an aide. But it was cool for the general to be able to tell those type of stories about her aide. "Hey, you know, my aide did this." You know?
Yeah, exactly. So your bragging rights for her.
Right. Yeah. So I did that. And then, I'd been a platoon leader deployed. And so the next thing was, be a company commander deployed. So that's what I did. So I found a unit, and actually it's what's called an ASG, Area Support Group, which is a brigade level unit. And they needed an H8C commander. And so when I got done being the aide, my general asked me, what do you want to do next? And I said, well, I'm going to look for a command position. And so I took charge of a 200 plus soldier area support group as an H8C commander. And we deployed again to Camp Victory, same place I was with Saddam. So,
right.
Yeah. So
everything comes back to that in your life.
Well, what was weird was when I got there, and what sucks about being an H8C commander is, especially as a first lieutenant, is everybody outranks you. Everybody in the unit, we have, dozens of lieutenant colonels, dozens of majors, we have 206s, so it's very top heavy, a lot of sergeant majors. Everybody wants to give you advice. And I'll be honest with you, most of the people that I work with probably didn't even know I ever did that. They just didn't know, and so they still treat you like you've never done anything. And so you're like, okay, I mean, I honestly, and this is probably the one time that you really hear me brag, but I could probably have retired right then and there and felt pretty good about my career. You know what I mean? I didn't necessarily need to do much more.
Yeah. Everything else would seem a bit anticlimactic after that detail.
Exactly. You're like, but I was a company commander for HHC commander for, 3 years, almost 4 years. And, then of course you just go with the natural progression of being a staff officer, and, you become a field grade, become a major, which is, after captain, you become major, and you're essentially second lieutenant field grade. So you go right back to your first real rank is lieutenant colonel. Everything else, as a major, you still get treated like a second lieutenant because you're a field grade and you're the newest. So, but I've managed to stay on orders for a long time. All together, I have about 11 years active duty. Not bad for a reservist.
Right.
So
that's
not too bad.
Quite unusual.
And 25 years total in the Army altogether.
So when are you? Do you have plans to make that final exit? Are you going to retire soon, or
no?
Lay it out, right?
I'm gonna let's see how far I can go before they kick me out. Let's see what I can. We'll see what I can do. And honestly, because I don't want to be. I'm not ready to be the dude wearing the veteran's hat, hanging out at the local diner and telling war stories. So I'll be honest with you, that mission is so surreal. It almost seems like in my normal day-to-day life, I'm just a normal guy, just some normal dude from Kansas City. My life is not, it doesn't feel any different. It was so long ago. It almost feels like something I didn't do. It doesn't.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like it's as we get older, as time passes, a lot of these things that we did as I remember things I did in high school, things I did in college, in my Army days, they all seem like a movie of another person that happened to go through it, And even to this day, even just my early years, like in my business career and stuff, they all seem kind of, seems almost surreal. But then you think about it though, and that's what makes you who you are right now. And it's what's led you to be that kind of grounded guy that you are now, who I'm imagining still loves a cigar.
I do, and I'll tell you, whenever I go to Arizona and I do my Friends of Freedom events with my friend David Haddad, and I talk to Heather, people like that, and you're like yourself, they'll remind you that you did this, and just seeing, because to me, when someone wants to hear about it, I'm just, okay, I'll tell you. It doesn't seem all that exciting to me. But to other people, they're like riveted on it. They want to hear about it. And, it was just like in court, like oftentimes the medical personnel would rotate at court, and they would just watch him on TV in awe and watch him do the most mundane things, eat a bowl of cereal, go to the bathroom. And to me, and they would look at me after they see our interactions on video, they would see us on the monitor, and I would go down there, talk to him. He would give me a hug, blah, 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 smoke a cigar. And then I would just come back up to the operations center and, start surfing the internet. And they would sit there and stare at me and like, do you realize you just got a hug from Saddam Hussein? And I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, we do that every day.
Yeah, story of my life, it's just the way it is. I'm like, yeah, it is what it is. So, it's, I wasn't there when he was executed. I didn't want to be there for it. We were offered the chance to stay, and I knew it was coming. I already knew it was coming, and I didn't want to be a part of that. And, I used to have, you always get the assholes, the military's full of assholes, and they would ask you, I don't know why you treat him like that, because if it was me, I would have kicked his ass. And, they're giving you the macho bullshit.
Right.
And I would always respond, well, I guess that's just why you're not doing the mission. Right. So that's a good thing I'm doing it. What are you going to gain from kicking a 69-year-old man? I don't understand. He didn't kill anybody in my family. So, and I'm not saying that him killing anybody is acceptable, but I don't have, sometimes it's hard to get in that mindset. You know what I mean? If you don't know the people, you're a little bit disconnected. My chain of command kept me disconnected from, they did not let me take tours of certain places or go certain places because they didn't want my interaction with him to change. And so if I would have saw some of the atrocities maybe firsthand, my interaction with him would change. So anyway, I just remember the last day, he was going up to court, and I said, I'm going to have to go. And he's like, oh, well, I'll see you later. And I said, no, I'm going to have to leave. So when you come back down, I'm not going to be here. And he got choked up, and he turned to the side, and you could see a tear roll down his face. And then he turned back to me, and he said, a son needs to go back to his mother. A mother needs her son. And we'd had long conversations about our mothers. He was close to his mother, and, he gave me a hug, and he gave me his prayer beads, and I gave him, and it was against protocol, but I got permission to do it. I gave him a Saint Michael the Archangel, like a medallion, something you would buy at a Catholic store. And I had given that to him because Michael is in both religions. It's in Islam and it's in the Christian religion. And so I gave that to him before I left. And, I had my initials inscribed on the back, and it just said, to my friend. And then he gave me his prayer beads, and that was it. That was the last time I saw him. So.
Yeah, it's one of the, if you look at things from just a complete outsider's perspective, and you realize that this guy was basically a horrible human being, but you didn't personally see that side of him. But he was also that human being too, the human being that interacted with you on a daily basis. So, and then it shows you the different facets of a human, that, most people are not all bad and most people are not all good. We all have these different facets of our life. Now, that was obviously an extreme situation in his case, and clearly like a monster to his people. And everyone knows that, but what they don't know is your part. And that's what's interesting. That's why I wanted to talk to you, because it shows that people are more complex than anyone would ever think they would be.
They are. And it kind of goes back to that show. If you watch that show Mindhunter on Netflix, where they're finding out about, they're interviewing serial killers for the first time, and they're trying to profile them. And, Ed Kemper, they started interviewing Ed Kemper, the first serial killer. And they found out that like a lot of the guards really liked him. And they all had this human side to them. And, sometimes it just takes the right personality to bring that out. I honestly think that he probably looks at me like a son, especially since he had lost his son. So we killed them.
Right.
He never held me accountable for that. He never blamed me for that. He never blamed me for anything. I think he really did see me as just kind of this innocent soul that was in his life that was there to protect him. And I was there to protect him. I would have, me and any of my soldiers would have died to protect him. That was the mission. So that's what we were going to do. So, if that Black Hawk went down, everything revolved around, our battle drills revolved around protecting him and keeping him alive. So, that was the mission.
Yeah, exactly. And when anyone who's had to follow orders in a military setting, or even just in any kind of real setting that's not maybe like a business setting, but even there, the people that are the most successful at what they do know the mission and commit to the mission.
Right. Absolutely.
Even if you
have to have an underlying philosophy, and like I said, mine was, it had a biblical aspect to it. I'm going to, love my enemy, and I'm going to treat him as I would want to be treated. I'm going to treat him with dignity and respect, because I really think, and do the right, I guess to sum it up would be to do the right thing. And I kind of try to do this in my life, and it sounds so simple, but some of the simplest lessons and philosophies are the best ones. Is do what's right when no one's looking. That's the most important thing. Do the right thing, and I really think that we all did the right thing. My soldiers did the right thing. I did the right thing by him, and I think Americans would be proud that we treated him like that. That it wasn't. There's a whole group of people out there who think the military are a bunch of, ogres, barbarians. But that just wasn't the case. And a lot of it is all of my soldiers, most of them were cops, most of them, in their civilian jobs. I was the only one that wasn't. So, and that's one of the few branches, like in the reserves, oftentimes, the occupation in the military doesn't coincide with the occupation as a civilian, but in the military police corps, in the reserves, it's pretty common. If you're an MP, you're a cop, usually,
Yeah, so that's definitely the case. That's. I mean, a lot of people go in, they become MPs first, and then they go transition to a civilian life as a police officer. But they're also reserve still. So,
right. And one of the things we noticed about the active component is when we were ripping out, we were offered by the active component of the 16th MP Brigade, the commander. He said, "Hey, if you guys want to stay, you can stay, and I can find something else for this active duty platoon to do, because while we were doing the mission and ripping out, we were finding out that the active duty guys, they lacked something. They lacked, and I'm not bashing on active duty guys, but it's just, they lacked the ability, I guess, to adapt to that mission. I guess they lacked the nuance that it required. So, and I think the fact that my reservists that I had working for me all had They had that capability from being civilian cops, or being firefighters, or being EMTs, or, you know what I mean? They all had this civilian experience that they could draw from, which helped out in that mission.
Yeah, I would imagine that because as a regular frontline police officer, you have to employ compassion in your daily interaction with all types of people, and a lot of them were not good, you know. So they were used to dealing with people that, you know, that were bad people in a lot of cases. Absolutely.
And my platoon sergeant, my father, you know, he told me, he goes, you know, when you become a lieutenant, you know, you find yourself a good platoon sergeant, and you latch on to him and you listen to what he tells you. Right. And that's what I did. My platoon sergeant was a mentor of mine. He taught me a lot. And, you know, that's what a lot of lieutenants have a hard time doing, especially like West Pointers. I'm not a West Pointer, thank God, but, you know, they're so full of themselves off a lot of times when they get out, you know, that get out of school, that they don't listen to anybody. And I think it's important to listen to your NCOs, because a lot of times there's a lot of wisdom there.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned this earlier, like that was my experience. The best officers were always the Mustangs, the ones that were enlisted first and then became officers.
Absolutely. So, but I'm very lucky. It almost feels like a dream, you know, for me, you know, so that I even did that. But I'm thankful for people like yourself and Heather and my friend David Haddad, who, you know, bring me back and like, hey, you know, you do realize you did this, right? You do realize that it's somewhat significant, you know, and it's so easy, you know. I mean, here it's 31 degrees here in Wichita, Kansas. I live in Kansas City, but I work in Wichita. So I have an apartment here and a house in Kansas City. And so, you know, you get used to day-to-day life, you know, you pay bills, you get off work. You know, cars break down. Your life is. I haven't become a celebrity because of this.
Right.
You know,
well,
it is what it is.
It shows just the kind of, you know, the beautiful absurdity of existence, if we want to put it that way.
It is. Yeah. But hey, that's what makes life beautiful, right? That's what makes it worth living.
Most definitely. And I think that's a good note to end this, son. And I really thank you. And I thank you for doing, you know, what you did, and for representing the country the way you did. And even though we sometimes have this difficult way of of kind of responding to this, definitely thank you for your service.
Absolutely. My pleasure. All in a day's work.
Thanks a lot, Kelly.
Way of the Renaissance Man podcast and lifestyle website are copyrighted 2020 by Jim Woods, all rights reserved. For more great interviews and Renaissance Man resources, visit wayoftherenaissanceman.com.